I am standing here as a teacher, but I have my own teachers in the audience, and I think it's a privilege to be lecturing in this auditorium today. Arterial occlusions. Let me start with arterial occlusions. Von Greffe in 1859 itself demonstrated embolic CRAO in endocarditis patients, and ever since then we have had several progresses in both the understanding of the disease, in the etiology of the disease and the management of the disease. And types based on location of the occlusion, we have the central retinal artery occlusion, branch retinal artery occlusion, ciliaretinal artery occlusion, and the combined artery and vein occlusion. These are the four types of occlusions that we get based on the location of the occlusion. Now, why is it so dreaded? Why is central retinal artery occlusion so dreaded? Because it is the only artery that supplies the retina, except when there is a ciliaretinal artery also in these patients, which is present in about 15% of the patients. So, and it is an end artery, and therefore once it gets occluded, the retina undergoes ischemic damage, and therefore it is called a devastating problem, usually occurring in elder patients or elderly patients over 60 years of age, predominantly in men, usually unilateral, causing sudden monocular painless visual loss with vision reduced to just counting fingers to just or even PL, a severe RAPD, and the anti-segment is usually normal in these patients. One thing about CRAO is that it is embolic, and because it is embolic, there is usually a history of amaurosis fugax. That is, the bulb in the house, just before it goes off, there is sometimes a flickering or a temporary loss of light, and as in a power failure, the light goes off, the patient experiences a power failure in respect to the eye. Causes of CRAO, mostly embolic, in carotid atherosclerosis, valvular heart disease, other minor causes like myxoma, left ventricular hypertrophy, IV drug abuse, lipid emboli from pancreatitis. These usually have poor outcomes. Trauma. Here I would like to emphasize the present day situations where we come across CRAO where a retrobulbar injection when given, or usually it's not a retrobulbar injection, it's a peribulbar injection that is given in the present day. But if a retrobulbar injection is given in the wrong way, and if it enters the eye, globe perforation occurs, it can cause a sudden increase in the intraocular pressure, causing compromise of the perfusion in the central retinal artery and occlusion of the same. And with the growing usage of intravitreal drugs, usually the anti-VEGFs, the steroids and other drugs for retinal vascular diseases and other diseases of the retina, if it is again improperly given, it can cause compromise of the central retinal artery. And during surgery for scleral buckling, if you are not careful, if you are not monitoring the intraocular pressure, a tight encircling band or a tight buckle can result in a central retinal artery occlusion. We have attached retinas but no visual gain because of CRAO. The ocular causes, prepapillary arterial loops, optic disc drusen, have a propensity for these patients developing CRAO. GCA is another very important cause of CRAO, and one has to bear it in mind. Well, a question to the audience at this point of time. Opacification of the retina that occurs in CRAO, I have not yet told about opacification, I will come to that, occurs in which retinal layer? Is it the inner plexiform, outer plexiform, RPE, rods or rods and cones? Can somebody shout out from the back? Well, the answer closest to right answer is the inner plexiform, but actually it's the inner retina, including the inner plexiform layer, the ganglion cell layer and the nerve fiber layer. And this is due to cessation of the axoplasmic transport which occurs in a CRAO. The cherry red spot at the fovea that you see in CRAO is because of the underlying RPE and the choroid seen through the thin fovea. The fovea is thin, the underlying RPE and the choroid is seen through it in the bright contrast against this opacified retina. There is a contrast of the opacified retina all around it, and therefore you see the cherry red spot. 25% may have patent ciliaretinal arteries, and usually in about 4 to 6 weeks time the fundus appearance comes back to normal, though the disc may become pale. Now, what are the other causes of cherry red spot? This is a question which you will face in the exam, maybe in the viva. So, one mnemonic to remember is cherry trees never grow tall in sand. standing for CRAO, Tay-Sachs disease, Niemann-Pick's disease, gangliosidosis, trauma, and the Sandoff disease. Coming to the vasculature, usually there will be an interruption in the in the blood flow that you see in these vessels. If you examine carefully, you can see the box scarring. The blood elements, the cellular element and the plasma get separated, and you can see the box scarring that is usually evident in the early cases of CRAO. Visible emboli are seen in about 20 to 40% of patients, and usually emboli, these carry a poor prognosis. Cholesterol emboli are usually from the carotid and seen in about 74% of all embolic cases. And calcific, the bright calcific emboli that you see, seen in about 10% of all embolic cases. And this, for this, the source is usually the cardiac valves. Angiographic finding of CRAO. What is it? Delay in retinal AV transit time, arterial different, normal choroidal filling, or all of the above? What is it? All of the above is right. I will not go into the details. Which wave is affected on ERG in CRAO? Is it the A wave or the B wave, the oscillatory potentials, or the cone flicker 30 Hertz? The answer is the B wave. It's a simple answer. The B wave is, the origin of the B wave is the inner retina. It is the inner retina that becomes ischemic in CRAO, and therefore the B wave is either reduced in amplitude or extinguished. So, coming to approach to a patient of CRAO, CRAO is an emergency. It is like any heart attack or a stroke. It is a stroke in the eye. And here, for purpose of approach, we can classify patients into patients over the age of 50 and patients of any age. In patients over the age of 50, you have to keep a high index of suspicion for GCA, not because you can do something to the CRAO in these patients, but because GCA has a propensity for development of CRAO in the other eye, and therefore at least in the other eye you can take some precautionary measures. And how do you suspect GCA? Any patient over the age of 50, a ESR of 50 millimeters in the first hour, a scalp tenderness, and a new headache in these patients, you have to suspect GCA in a patient with sudden loss of vision due to CRAO. Coming to the any age, you should not forget the ABC of investigations. I will come to what is ABC. In fact, it is a mnemonic again. Hypertension, diabetes, and hyperlipidemia. Do a carotid Doppler to look for cholesterol emboli, look for plaques and stenosis. Which is better for the patient, having plaques or having stenosis? Plaques are worse than stenosis. However stenotic it may be, a plaque, even if it is small, can throw an embolus and cause a CRAO. Cardiac echo, transthoracic versus transesophageal. Transesophageal has a better yield because it is actually closer to the heart from where you are scanning, and that is where you can pick up calcific emboli, or the source of the calcific emboli that you see in the eye. MRI for carotid and aortic dissection, and a hypercoagulability workup is mandatory in all patients, especially when the age of these patients is less than 45 or 50. Treatment it's an ophthalmic emergency, so we have to treat immediately. Treatment within 4 hours is theoretical. Patients usually turn up later than 4 hours, or even sometimes after several days, most often after several days. We have to lower the antechamber pressure or the eye pressure by an antechamber paracentesis and distal massage, maybe using your finger distal massage or a contact lens to rub the cornea, press for a few seconds and release. A sudden release might sometimes dislodge the embolus and make it move forward. So the dislodgement of the embolus is possible when you suddenly cause a decompression. Use of hyperbaric oxygen and vasodilators can increase oxygenation to the ischemic retina, and use of fibrinolytic agents seems to be logical in these patients. Other treatments that have been mentioned are retrobulbar injection, the YAG laser embolectomy, vitrectomy, and sheathotomy. These are all logical, very heroic, but not useful. Okay, coming to transient monocular vision loss, what do we do? Some answers have been got from the NASCET trial, the North American Symptomatic Carotid Endarterectomy trial, which recommended that we do in all these patients with transient monocular vision loss a transesophageal echocardiography, carotid Doppler, magnetic resonance angiography, and CTA. If the transesophageal echocardiography is abnormal, then start the patient on anticoagulants. This is the guideline given by the NASCET. On a carotid Doppler, if you find that the stenosis is more than 70%, then you can do a carotid endarterectomy. If it is between 50 and 70%, then, and if the patient has experienced a TIA of more than one time, then a carotid endarterectomy is prudent. But if the stenosis is less than 50%, there is no need for treatment. The same guidelines holds good for CRO as well. But in the present day, I think carotid stenting has taken over the practice of carotid endarterectomy. Asymptomatic Hollenhaus plaques, nothing to be done. So it means that symptoms dictate the management. It is not the appearance of the carotid angiogram, carotid Doppler or the cardiac echocardiography. It is the symptoms of the patient that we take into consideration in the management. BRAO, some differences like prognosis is good, NVE may develop in these patients unlike in CRAO. Artery to artery collaterals are pathognomonic. Question here, all can cause BRAO except CVS disease, keratoid-occlusive disease, giant cell arteritis and protein C deficiency. Can somebody come up with the answer, please? It is giant cell arteritis because giant cell arteritis is a disease of larger and medium-sized vessels and not of the, it may cause a central retinal artery occlusion but not a branch retinal artery occlusion because branch retinal artery is very small to be affected by GCA. A coeloretinal artery occlusion is seen in about 20% of patients, angiographically in 32% of patients. Where else do you see a retinal vascular disease associated with coeloretinal artery occlusion? Yes, it is in non-ischemic CRVO which is present in 40% of patients. Means 40% of coeloretinal artery occlusions are associated with non-ischemic CRVO. Combined artery and vein occlusions have a very bad prognosis, usually seen in hypercoagulability states and patients with severe hypertension. So the least you can do as an ophthalmologist, you see a patient with CRAO, what least you can do is to partner, to advise the internist. It is a life-threatening situation with systemic ramifications. You have to collaborate with the Department of Medicine. You have to modify the risk factors for this patient. Counsel the patient about the risk of a large cerebral stroke. Don't scare the patient, but at least tell him that he has a risk of developing a stroke, and the physician has to be given a feedback about this condition so that he can take over. Coming to vein occlusions, I am going to speak on the current protocols about the investigations and the management only because we have only been given 30 minutes for this entire presentation, which is such a large topic. So what is new is OCT. What is new is again pharmacotherapy. Again, location-based classification. You can have any of these picture like a peripheral vein occlusion, a macular vein occlusion, a branch retinal vein occlusion, a hemicentral retinal vein occlusion and a central retinal vein occlusion with the common clinical picture of superficial and deep hemorrhages, venous dilatation, venous tortuosity, retinal edema, cotton spots, all in the area of the affected area of drainage of these occluded vessels. So commonest cause of reduced vision in retinal vein occlusion is macular edema. Excellent. So macular edema, macular ischemia and ocular neovascularization are the three effects of retinal vein occlusions which cause visual loss. And the complications are, you can see here, this I liken to a plank of wood kept in water. What happens when the period of contact increases with the water? The piece of wood will swell, the layers will separate. Similarly here, the retinal layers get separated. It gets swollen and the retinal layers get separated. It can break down to form large cystoid spaces, and that is what is known as chronic CME. So there is no retinal tissue in that particular slide there. And you can have associated coeloretinal artery occlusion, as I already mentioned. More importantly, neovascularization of the iris leading to glaucoma. What can be treated? Of all these complications, we can treat the underlying systemic disease, definitely. We can treat the macular edema. Yes, we can treat the macular edema. What we cannot treat is the macular ischemia. So I have prepared an algorithm for the purpose of today's class. So first thing in the algorithm is to diagnose the venous occlusion. Rule out vascular retinopathies, rule out papillophlebitis. It is usually vascular venous occlusion. The clinical picture is unmistakable. You cannot mistake it for anything else. But a novice, if you have a hypertensive retinopathy or a diabetic retinopathy with severe hemorrhages all over the fundus, especially a mixed retinopathy, can mimic a CRVO, and you can have some confusion. Classification of the CRVO is again extremely important. It can vary from a clinical picture like this with just venous congestion and a few hemorrhages to venous congestion, tortuosity and macular edema as in this picture, to the typical blood and thunder appearance of a ischemic CRVO. The differentiation is very crucial because the management is totally different between non-ischemic and ischemic. The natural course is again very important to know because it warrants a very close follow-up. This is the same patient who has passed through all these stages a month apart. You can see the change in the picture from left to right. 34%, one-third of all non-ischemic CRVOs progress to ischemic CRVOs due to a fall in the perfusion pressure and extension of the thrombus. And what we have to do is to do a monthly follow-up, and on each follow-up we have to check for visual acuity, an RAPD, an undilated pupillary examination for NVI with a maximum illumination and magnification on the slit lamp. Check the IOP and do a fundoscopy for increasing hemorrhages. This will give you some idea about the progression or conversion of a non-ischemic to an ischemic type. This is again a very important thing, how to differentiate. I wanted this to be interactive, but then I think for paucity of time I will tell it from my end itself. There are 2 morphological tests and 4 functional tests which Here has described. The morphological tests are the hemorrhages or the fundus picture and the fluorescein angiographic picture, and the functional tests are vision loss in the form of visual acuity and fundus and the field loss. Pupillary reaction, the RAPD, the quantification of the RAPD helps you, and ERG B wave. So if the RAPD is more than 1.2 log units, and if the ERG shows a reduction in the amplitude of the B wave by less than 60%, it is highly probable that this patient has an ischemic CRVO. But because we don't do ERG very frequently and because of the non-availability of ERG machines in many centers, we can take the other functional test of vision itself. So an RAPD with a reduced vision can give us some clue that this might be an ischemic CRVO. The next is first aid. First aid is something that we usually try to give to any patient who has a catastrophic problem like a CRAO or a CRVO. So here I would like to refer to some anecdotal reports of the use of intravitreal TPA, the use of subcutaneous low molecular weight heparin in the management of CRVO, of course under physician supervision. My own case of an oncologist who came to me with a picture with the flashes of light and a little reduced vision, which after 3 days when she came with the blood reports was found to have a picture of a typical CRVO. And this patient, when we started her on low molecular weight heparin, rapidly recovered, and within a period of 3 to 4 weeks she had a normal fundus picture with fully resolved fundus signs. But there are no studies to substantiate benefit of fibrinolysis. If the patient really wants you to do something, maybe fibrinolysis with TPA and low molecular heparin has some role. The next is investigations, blood tests. Before that, I think I will skip this because I have only 11 minutes left. The ocular predisposing factors: glaucoma, optic nerve edrusion, similar to what I told in the arterial occlusion group, tilted disc, ischemic optic neuropathy, mass lesion, thyroid ophthalmopathy, and so on. Dehydration, pregnancy, oral contraceptive pill patients, they can have patients on diuretics. So all these patients are patients prone for venous occlusions. So again, never forget the ABC of investigations. When I said ABC during arterial occlusions, I didn't tell you what ABC what I meant by ABC. Here it is. A, B and C. A standing for average blood sugar in a diabetic patient. If it is high, you better control it. BP, B for BP, C for cholesterol or lipid profile. So if you do the ABC, this forms the first phase of testing. The second phase of testing, the complete blood counts, the ESR, the VDRL, the lipid profile, the plasma homocysteine. These are all the second phase of testing where you individually, each of them may not be able to give you any information. They're all non-specific tests, but collectively, along with the clinical signs, you can get some idea about what the patient may be having as an underlying cause for the CRVO. And then the third phase of testing is thrombophilic conditions, which one has to do in all the younger patients. Protein S, protein C, antithrombin 3. These are all the anticoagulant factors which are present in the coagulation cascade. And therefore one has to look for these and rule out coagulopathies. And there is a definite guideline for when you should order for an abnormal factor V Leiden. And that is retinal venous occlusion with a history of thromboembolic disease elsewhere in the body, and patients with recurrent bilateral venous occlusions, you have to order a factor V Leiden in a young patient. FFA, I will not go into the detail because it is not necessary. Only 12 to 18% develop neovascularization, and most of the information is evident on clinical testing itself. Treatment, well, I think this MCQ I will use as the guidelines given by the CVOS study. PRP recommended in all cases, true or false? False. Why? Because 1/3 of non-ischemic CRVOs progress to ischemic CRVOs, and only ischemic CRVOs can cause visual complications, severe visual complications and NVI. How many of prophylactic PRP recommended in all cases of NVI or no? Yes or no? Here again the answer can be yes and no. There are two schools of thought. Here feels that it is not required because less than half of the patients with ischemic CRVO progress to NVI, and those patients who progress to NVI, who have NVI, only half of them or a little more than half of them will develop NVG. So it is useless and not, in fact, contraindicated to do a PRP in a patient who has no macular vision. You are knocking off his peripheral vision as well, and therefore Harris says it is better not to do a PRP unnecessarily for those 50% of patients who would never develop NVG. So what has changed is the OCT guided treatment and the pharmacotherapy. So this is an example of OCT, how OCT helps. It helps in quantifying the macular edema. It helps in serial monitoring of its course and the treatment. And one more important input that we have in the present day is retinal disease has multifactorial pathophysiology. Inflammation seems to be very, very important factor in the pathogenesis of retinal disease, especially in the rectal vein occlusions also. And the presence of cytokines, inflammatory cytokines like the interleukin 8-6, the growth factors, and all these which are present in the vitreous cavity they give some lead to the fact that these may be having an inflammatory basis. And therefore, what studies involve steroids? Quickly. The score, yes. The standard care versus corticosteroids for retinal vein occlusion study. Here they randomized to standard care, to 1 milligram triamcinolone and 4 milligrams of triamcinolone. And what did they find? That in the triamcinolone group, there was good effect in the first 4 weeks itself, in the first 4 months itself. In the month 4, you can see that almost 20% of patients have a visual gain of 15 letters or more. And in the first year, in the first year itself, in the month 12 itself, we can see that 27% of patients in the 1 milligram group and 26% of patients in the 4 milligram group had a good visual recovery, and this was sustained up to the 24th month. So this is a score study. And the risk of complications due to the steroid, which is very well known as causing cataract and glaucoma, was much less in the 1 milligram group, and therefore 1 milligram IVTA was considered better than standard care meaning observation in patients with CRVO. What about BRVO? Well, the results were the same. Observation versus laser versus IVTA 1 milligram versus IVTA 4 milligrams. What is the answer? Was it IVTA or standard care? Well, we can see that in the score BRVO, standard care for BRVO is laser. I am combining both CRVO and BRVO here because of paucity of time. So you can see at month 12, there is not much difference between standard care 1 milligram or 4 milligrams of IVTA. But when you look at the month 24 or the 2-year results, standard care definitely had a better outcome as compared to IVTA, which was maintained even up to the 3rd year. So for BRVO, remember, it is not standard, it is standard care that is better than steroids. That is the score BRVO recommendation. Cruise trial is one trial you have to remember. Sham versus 0.3 versus 0.5 milligram of ranibizumab, that is a Lucentis. At month 6 itself, you can see that there is a very heartening improvement in the vision with an average 15 letters versus 0.8 letter in the CRVO group, which was sustained up to the 12th month. And in the BRAVO study, which is for the BRVO, 18 letters versus 7 letters in the at the 6th month, and 18 letters versus 12 letters in the 24th month, in the 12th month. So here you have to know that starting the treatment early helps. In the sham, they didn't treat up to 6 months and started treatment with ranibizumab in the later, after 6th month, which led to some improvement but did not reach the improvement that the other two groups reached. So it is important to start the treatment early. Bevacizumab had good results also. Geneva trial tried, what did it try? It tried dexamethasone implant, okay? And you can see that in the CRVO sub-analysis, there was a very good improvement between day 30 to day 90 with between 7 and 8 letter improvement, but it was not sustained up to the 180th day or the 6th month, whereas in the BRVO sub-analysis, it was maintained even up to the 6th month. There was a good improvement of 10 letter compared to 5 letters of the sham, and this was sustained, though not to the same effect at the 60th day. It was sustained up to the 180th day. So what is the Galileo study? What did it use? It compared aflibercept, Eylea, that is the brand name. Proportion of patients gaining more than 15 letters with Eylea was 56% in the Copernicus and 60% in the Galileo, both parallel studies being done for Eylea 2Q4, meaning 4 weekly injections of 2 milligrams of aflibercept versus placebo, and this was continued up to 24 weeks, and after 24 weeks it was continued on a PRN basis, on a monthly monitoring and a PRN basis up to 52 weeks, and thereafter up to 100 weeks as well, where it was after 52 weeks up to 100 weeks it was monitored at quarterly intervals. So you can see that overall it has given good results. So what to choose from the current protocols? You have so many drugs, so many kids on the block. So the efficacy and risks are probably comparable, and there are no head-to-head studies. We don't have comparison between Eylea and Lucentis. We don't have comparison between Lucentis and Avastin. So what we should do is to take the patient into the discussion process, and the decision will be based on whether the drug is FDA approved, whether the drug source is reliable, whether the patient is able to afford, and of course the patient's convenience and the length of the treatment that the patient is likely to be on. So all these you have to take into account before you come to a conclusion. I think I still have a minute, so I'll just tell you for completion's sake, the other study is the ROVO study, which was discontinued actually, which tried radial optic neurotomy to decompress the optic nerve sheath and sort of restore the flow through the central little vein, but it was not useful because it was already thrombosed and restoration was not possible. One thing about CRVO you have to remember in the management is the incidence of NVG is quite substantial in number, and therefore you should remember the protocol of anti-VEGF drugs, laser, cyclophotocoagulation and surgery in these cases, which is usually surgery for recalcitrant glaucomas. You have to use valves. Again, you can remember A, B, C here, Ahmed valve, Baerwelt valve and collagen valve. Express miniature is another valve. If you can remember that also. And these are the valves that you can implant in these patients of NVG. Vitrectomy, of course, has its own benefits. BVO, can I take 2 minutes? So the BVO study recommended that you wait for 3 months for clearance of hemorrhage, do a fluorescein angiography at the end of 3 months or after resolution of the hemorrhage, and if the vision is less than 6/12 or 20/40, and if angiography shows perfused intact foveal capillaries, do a macular grid laser and follow up these patients. And if on angiography you find that there is non-perfusion of the peripheral retina of more than 5 disc diameters, follow up at 4 monthly intervals, because CNP of more than 5 disc diameters in 40% of these patients, neovascularization eventually develops over a period of 6 months to 3 years. and 60% of these patients with neovascularization will develop vitreous hemorrhage. And the treatment for this is sectoral laser. Another treatment modality which was tried but has not been given, which recently has been given up, is the chorioretinal venous anastomosis. Surgical decompression, sheathotomy, just for completion's sake, you can remember, maybe read up. Okay, how do you choose now between IVTA, anti-VEGF and steroid? So, IVTA is used for patients with no IOP issues, who are elderly phakics who do not mind cataract surgery. It is economical and effective. Anti-VEGFs, maybe Lucentis or bevacizumab or ranibizumab, can be used if the patient presents early, whether it is phakic or aphakic. Especially if there is a foveal hemorrhage, it helps in resolving the foveal hemorrhage. If there are IOP issues, if the patient is having glaucoma, then probably anti-VEGFs are better over IVTA. It is short-acting though, compared to the DEX implant, where it can be used in phakics as well. It can be used in patients with borderline glaucoma as well. It should be used when there is a previous treatment failure. It has the longest action, lasts for about 3 to 4 months, but it is expensive. You can use a combination of IVTA and anti-VEGF, but in the present day, I think the choice should be between anti-VEGF and DEX implant, depending on individualization and customization. So individualization and customization is the key to treatment of venous occlusions, and that is all this talk is about. Thank you very much.